Okay, so now we're down to the last part of The Fall of the House of Usher, the abridged version. And I'm going to use that as my excuse of not realizing that we only had 3 paragraphs to go. 2 paragraphs to go in the story when I stopped the last recording. But I have found out through these recordings that I actually do, in fact, talk a lot and explain a lot, which I hope is helpful to you. But if not, I'm sorry. I'll work on it. Okay, so when we left off with Roderick Usher on page 15 of your packet, telling us that his sister stood outside the door, his sister who was supposed to be dead. As if in the superhuman energy of his utterance there had been found the potency of a spell, the huge antique panels to which the speaker pointed drew slowly back upon the instant their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of a rushing gust. But then, without these doors, there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold. Then, with a low moaning cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies bore him to the floor a corpse and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. So, what happens is Lady Madeline was not dead, and she comes outside the door, and when she comes through the door, she grabs Roderick Usher. They fall to the floor, and they're both dead now. And now our assumption is right here where it says that he was victim to the terrors he had anticipated. I'm going to go out on a limb and say perhaps Roderick Usher had a heart attack. I mean, he was actually scared to death. Could make a case for it. From that chamber and from that mansion, I fled aghast. All right, so our unnamed narrator, like, let me get my stuff and go. So he's leaving. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly, there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued, for the vast house and its shadows were along behind me. The radiance was that of the full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through the once barely discernible fissure of which I have spoken before, as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. If you remember from our first recording, when he first saw the House of Usher, he saw this tiny crack, but the crack in the House of Usher went from the roof to the foundation. And now, in this storm, he sees that this crack is getting bigger. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. So in all this storm, the storm is all around the house now. And the crack in the house is widening. Look at the picture on this page. That's a good illustration. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. The house is collapsing, y'all. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dank tarn at my feet closed suddenly and silently over the fragments of the House of Usher. Dun 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 dun. So now, remember when we talked about Roderick and Madeline? Roderick and Lady Madeline represented the house, and the house represented them. So they have died, and now the house has in essence died. The house has split apart and sunk into the tarn, and their bodies are in it. They're dead. The house is dead. The House of Usher, both versions of the House of Usher, the people and the physical house, are gone. Now, when you look at page 16, All right, I'll come back to that in another video and explain those, okay? So I do hope you enjoyed the story. It is one of my favorite stories. It is a story that leaves a lot of questions, but now y'all have read Poe before, and you know Poe doesn't explain a whole lot. He leaves a lot of questions. And I like to think, certainly I don't know, because even though I'm old, I'm not as old as Edgar Allan Poe. I like to think that he did that so that readers could and would use their imagination and come up with different reasons why this or that happened. And it actually gets you more involved in the story. I think he wanted readers to work a little bit. But I honestly think when you do work a little bit, you help create your imagination. And hey, we need that.